All right, y'all, let's dive right in it today. With you, as always, your hosts, Justin Kaiser and Ryan Ratliff. Producer Lance may be jumping on a little bit later. You never know about that guy. He just comes in and out like a ninja. Sometimes he's here, sometimes he's not. But with us today, we have a very, very, very special guest. This guy is a Bigfoot researcher and a member of the BFRO. He is an author. As you can see, I have two of his books sitting beside of me, Tracking the Stoneman and the Appalachian Bigfoot. And he is a longtime chiropractor, which I'm finding super important right now, thinking that I'm probably going to have to go see one pretty soon. So we may have to talk that later on as well. Dr. Russell Jones, everybody. Dr. Jones, how are you, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me, man. It's good to be here.
Yeah,
I'm always excited to get on there. Talk Bigfoot.
Yeah, man. Well, we like talking Bigfoot every opportunity that we get. Sometimes we're recording episodes that have absolutely nothing to do with Bigfoot, or we think, and then it just kind of streamlines or takes a detour toward the big guy. So we love the topic. We love talking our homie Bigfoot, as Ryan calls him all the time. But we're super grateful that you came on here. Me and Ryan, we've talked about your work for a little while now, and how it would be great to get you on here. So, I sent you a message the other day in hopes that maybe possibly you'd respond, and then boom, you were in it and ready to go. So I appreciate that. I'm happy to have you here. But Dr. Jones, we'll jump right into it. How did you get into the Bigfoot field?
It's always interesting when someone says, they always ask me, what are you like? Are you a Bigfoot researcher, or you're an enthusiast, and I'm always trying to decide what it is that I am. And I really don't know what I am. I haven't found a word that I really like or I'm gravitating to, but I have been involved with Bigfoot research for decades now, but Bigfoot has largely shaped my life. And what I mean by that is I had a couple of experiences happen when I was young, and I was raised in a family that we were all outdoorsmen. We all fished, we all hunted, we all trapped, we all ran dogs, we dug ginseng. We were in the woods all the time. People would come from, this is the most remote county in Southeast Ohio. There's only one stoplight still in the county, national forest and state land. And people would drive every year to see how many deer we had hanging on the first day of deer season and try to buy our dogs all the time. And I was in the woods New Year's Day, New Year's Eve. We had gotten around 4 inches of snow, and New Year's Day was a beautiful sunny day, but it was really cold, teens or 20s. And I was hunting along this hillside with this gentleman that was going to be in the Army. And, we were just showing him our dogs, our rabbit dogs. And I was coming along this hillside, and there was a cave that was up on the hillside, but not one that anyone would be able to see until you were on top of it. And when I came along, I saw these barefoot human footprints. And at that time, I didn't know anything about Bigfoot or that there was such a thing. And I thought that it was this is the 70s. So I thought it was like some type of vagrant, druggy guy that had spent the night in that. And, so I went up and looked inside that cave to see if there was like clothes or a fire, and there was nothing like that. But it was apparent to me that whatever was in that cave had went there to weather the storm, and had heard me coming with my dogs, and had left literally right in front of me when it heard us coming. And that gentleman and I looked at those tracks for a while. They weren't large. They were crystal clear. You could see all the toes. It looked to me like about the normal male human size. And then we just kind of went on. We didn't think much of it. I guess because we didn't know anything about that. Then that summer, I was fishing with an uncle, and both of us wearing pistols because we were in a very snaky place. And it had this little creek that you could jump across in the summer, but about a mile or two downstream, there was a beaver dam that nobody knew about. There was no path or trail to get to. We just kind of walked through the woods to get there. And the fishing was unbelievable. And we were standing on this dam, and about, I'd say, 35 or 40 yards from me was the other side of the brush on the other side of the creek. And there was this noise I heard coming down through the woods. And I glanced over at my uncle. We weren't talking or anything. We were just quietly fishing. And I saw him look too. And I just assumed that it was a deer. But then the bushes started shaking and it started screaming very monkey-like. And it lasted about 20 seconds. I asked him when it started, I'm like, what do you think that is? And he said, just look for a tree you can get to. It has to come across the water to get to us. But after it quit, it's funny because we just kept fishing because, we were always raised that there wasn't anything in the woods that wasn't more afraid of us. And, we are a vet. There wasn't anything out there that was a big deal. And, I didn't know what it was. Later that year, I saw Leonard Nimoy had a show called In Search Of, and they had an episode on Bigfoot. And I just had an inkling. And from that time on, I followed everything Bigfoot. I played baseball in college and went to undergraduate and had a science degree. And then I went on to doctor's school, and I was in Iowa for 5 years. And West Virginia appealed to me. It was about 2 hours or 2.5 hours to Charleston from where I grew up in Lancaster, Ohio, south of Columbus. And I followed the whole time I was here. I was building my practice. And about probably 13 or 14 years ago, I saw Dr. Jeff Meldrum, which, Dr. Meldrum's the anthropologist from Idaho State. He's written a book and he's on TV all the time. And of course, I had read his book because I had read every Bigfoot book. And I wanted to go see him speak. He was speaking at this Bigfoot conference in Ohio. And at that time, it was maybe, 300 people there. It was not like it is now. Like I was there just a couple weekends ago, and they had 5,000 people that went through. And so I listened to him speak. I talked to him for a minute afterwards, maybe had him sign his book or something. I didn't know anybody, of course, because I wasn't in Bigfoot world then. And when I came home, when you Google Bigfoot, BFRO.net comes up, the Bigfoot Research Organization, and maybe 10 or 15 times a year, somewhere in the United States or Canada, they will have an expedition where, you pay $500, you sign a confidentiality clause. Excuse me, you get interviewed to make sure you're normal and you're serious about the matter. And then they take you to some place where there's been a history of Bigfoot activity. And I just thought, I'm going, and if they're weird, I'm leaving. I'm out of here. And back then, Matt Moneymaker from the TV show, which runs the group, went to every expedition, and he was there. And Matt and I hit it off. And after that expedition, I started doing the reports in Ohio and West Virginia for the group. At that time, I was about the only one doing them for those two states. And now I look back and, I came to West Virginia largely because of that. I have a farm in Ohio that I'm at all the time. And I bought it strictly based on Bigfoot activity, location, where it sits. I practice in West Virginia. I've been in practice 31 years this fall. And, I have places that I visit here. So it's, just convenient for me living where I do, probably where you guys are, similar to where you guys live in Appalachia, that, I can be anywhere in 10, 15 minutes. It's a good spot that maybe there's been Bigfoot sightings before. And, now I look back, and that large conference, I've been fortunate enough to speak there several times. And, I've got the 2 books out now. The second one, the Appalachian Bigfoot, was 17 weeks, #1 on Amazon. And who would believe that many people would, be interested in a Bigfoot book? But apparently, it's the monster we grow up with. And that's about the history of it. I mean, literally do something Bigfoot related every single day, whether it's talking to a witness or being in the woods or making notes about, the publisher has me I'm going to do a second edition of the Stoneman that'll be out probably late this year or the first of next year. And so I'm organizing for that right now.
Well, that's awesome. I'm really excited for any other books that you have coming out. You know, like I said, I've been reading both of these books, especially in preparation, you know, to interview you. Even before you agreed to it, I already had in my mind that, you know, we were going to interview you. So,
well, I'm glad you did, man. I'm glad to get a chance to do it. But it's funny, you know, I had never considered doing a book, and in one of the social media groups, there was a guy that just joined the BFRO, and he asked, you know, do you have any suggestions? And I said, my suggestion would be to make sure that any witness you interview, any picture that somebody sends to you, just ask for permission right then to use it, even if you don't know that you will, because, you know, I didn't know that I would be writing books. But later, some of the best pictures I had, I couldn't use because, you know, I didn't have permission. And when I went back years later, you couldn't locate the person, you know, their phone number's gone, their emails changed, or whatever it happens to be. So when I would speak, I would use some of those pictures, but, you know, not in the books. But I was seeing patients one day, and this guy came in and gave me his book, and he said, you know this guy? And I looked at it, and the title was like Bigfoot in West Virginia or something. I don't even remember what it was. And I was like, no. And, you know, and I'm looking at it because, you know, I mean, there's not really, like in West Virginia now, there's maybe just a couple people interested in it. So really in Appalachia, all of us kind of would know each other. And in the BFRO, there's maybe, you know, a couple hundred of us, so we all know each other as well. And it was this college professor that had written this book, but what he had did was he had a opening chapter and a closing chapter, but all the rest of his book were just reports that I had published. And so he put those in there, and then he would maybe every now and then have a little comment about it. And I asked some lawyer that was one of my patients, I was like, man, this guy took all some of my reports I'd done. He wrote this book, and he's like, well, you know, how much money is he making? And by the time that you gave him a cease or desist order, you know, nothing's going to happen. And that was the time that got me started. And I started writing the Stoneman, which, you know, probably a year it took me. I would write in the evenings after. I always go to the gym and work out after I see patients. Now at 31 years, I don't work on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I'm always in the woods on those 2 days. And then when I would come home, you know, when I come in from the woods, I sit down with my iPad and write notes about what I thought that particular day in the woods, like moon phase, temperature, weather, you know, if I saw anything, which you never do really, or heard anything, which you never do really. And my thoughts on the area, whether I should have been there sooner or later, or whatever it happens to be. But so I guess I should call that guy and thank him for getting me, you know, going with writing the books.
Yeah, absolutely. He was an inspiration.
Yeah, and you know, I didn't think it was fair.
Well, I'm sure his book wasn't #1 for 17 weeks on Amazon, so he can show.
Yeah, you know, that's right, man.
So,
and, you know, the first one did well, and I was thankful for that. You know, that was, you know, largely because our practice is large. You know, that probably patients brought an awful lot of copies, but you know, it did well, and I was happy with it. And you know, and I chose Stoneman because, you know, there was 5 Indian tribes in West Virginia. None of them lived here, but 5 of them used it for hunting, and 3 of them had names for Bigfoot. And Stoneman was one. And it's funny now because, you know, I was just telling somebody the other day that in retrospect, I'm not sure I would even use that chapter, but I remember feeling really strongly about it when the publisher, you know, told me that it should say something about Bigfoot. And I was like, you can do a subtitle, but that's the name I want. And, you know, it is what it is.
Well, I like it. I like anything that has a little bit of historical reference in there. And that's actually the next question I was going to ask you was, can you explain to the audience what the Stoneman is? And so you covered that before I ever even asked.
Well, in reality, we don't know. I mean, Bigfoot has a history and reports of throwing stones. It also has a history of being on the hilltops, where in Appalachia we have a lot of rocky, stony areas. Is it related to that? Some people believe that it's related to the camouflage, that, they camouflage so well that, you couldn't make it out. And so no one's really sure what the Indians in that particular tribe, what they meant, what it meant to them. But that's just me guessing, that's what it was.
Yeah, that would make sense. It would make sense. So what does an average, say you're going out into the woods, into the wilderness to do your research? You were talking about the documentation that you keep, after you spend a day in the woods. What does that process look like for you? Where do you try to gain your information to better use in search of Bigfoot?
So it's a combination of how I do it is I keep what I call my Bigfoot calendar. And my Bigfoot calendar has any reports that I deem to be credible. It has my game camera findings. It has any audio that people have sent to me with the location attached to it and the date. And so it used to be that I would commonly be from the high mountains of West Virginia to the Hocking Hills of Ohio, which is about a 6-hour drive. And I may be visiting any point in that time. But as the years went by, I've learned that a lot of times I was just chasing shadows. And so now I stay in maybe 4 areas pretty much all the time. And so I have over 40 game cameras, and I have all those 40 game cameras in those 4 areas. But I'm trying different things with all of them. Like there's a place that has a history of Bigfoot sightings that's 15 minutes here from my house. I have 5 cameras there right now. They're all Bushnell. In the past, I used only Reconyx, but now I'm trying to mix in a few other cameras just by chance that there's something about a Reconyx that, Bigfoot may be able to hear it or whatever it happens to be. That's a whole deal, a whole, subject is game cameras about, why we don't have better pictures and, that type of thing. And so what I do is if I have something on my calendar, say that there was a sighting in a particular area 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and I'm hiking that week, I will be where that happened. If it is nothing on my calendar, then I will be in those areas, but trying out new areas that I have not been to. So I'm trying to create a calendar that's reasonable of where I can expect something to be in a general area. And then, like, there's one place in Ohio that there's a medical doctor, Kenny Brown, and he's interested in LDR, long duration recording. And Kenny has several of the recordings out, or if his recorder's out, and he'll call me and say, this GPS coordinate, I heard a wood knock this day, this time, and I add it to my calendar. And, probably like several of the places I have an idea of, like in one place 4 times a year, 4 months, I know that where they are roughly. It doesn't mean that you can go there and see one, of course, but a good idea that maybe they may be in that particular place. And then one of the things I've talked about before is, of course, I'm trying to get a picture of Bigfoot on my camera, but, you're trying all these different techniques to be able to do it. I believe personally that the reason why we're having trouble with the cameras is I think that they hear. There's some studies out. The Chinese did a study several years ago. There's a new game camera study that just came out several months ago. And most of the cameras are about 30 decibels. So, a small child can usually hear the camera. For instance, I was just finishing a book on Siberian tigers. And, the guy that they had one picture of a Siberian tiger, and they're about 12 feet long, the big ones. And this one guy sat in a bunker about the size of a tomb for 6 months. And about every 6 weeks, someone would visit him and just drop off rice and some other stuff and leave. They wouldn't say a word. They wouldn't talk. And he had a sheet down over that, a camouflage sheet, and his camera stuck out there all the time. And it took 6 months, but he developed pictures of that. But he put out 32 game cameras, and 30 of the cameras were found by the tigers and were demolished, all from behind. So
wow,
it led me to believe that, you know, it's just, there's something there that's a struggle for us to do. So I'm trying new techniques and new things. Like, for instance, in one place I was just in this last couple of months, I'm walking along a creek, and whenever the creek is really loud, I put a camera up at whatever angle I can get the best view or the best shot, just hoping that that creek is going to block the noise of my camera. And I'm just trying different things like that all the time. But what I've learned with doing my cameras and doing smaller areas, instead of, you know, 6 hours you're one place and 6 hours you're another place, and Joe Blow calls you and they saw a Bigfoot and you're running up there to look at that. Of course, you go there, the Bigfoot's long gone. You know, you never see anything. Maybe you find a track or something, but nothing is really helping you see the animal. But what I have noticed is that there'll be times when you're in this small area, and let's say that you're in a park that's 10,000 acres, but it's like Appalachia. There's woods for miles everywhere, but they still have a park in the middle of it. So there's a lot more room than that 10,000 acres. But maybe you have 12 cameras in that 10,000 acres. And so you're learning those animals, you know, because the cameras are in place about a year. So I know that there's the same, say, 20 deer that are going to go through my camera each day or every couple of days, or there's ever how many coyotes or bobcats or whatever it happens to be. But I've noticed that in time, in some places, you'll notice that all your animals will disappear. And usually it's for around a week, 7 to 10 days. The animals in your area are disrupted. And so, you know, it's just a possible hypothesis that obviously something is in there disrupting it. Is it a hunter? Is it a mountain lion? Is it a Bigfoot, or whatever it happens to be? But of course, I'm choosing areas based on historical things. So I'm considering that and putting it on my calendar. So whenever one of my cameras show up like that, then, you know, I'll put it on there and try to be in that place. If I have a place where there's a lot of action, I may move 5 cameras in a place that's like just a couple square miles. If there's been a sighting or something like that, and my cameras went dead last year, well, I'll move them in and I'll go in with a ladder and I'll have them up on top of some tree, or, you know, who knows what I'm doing, just try to find, you know, a way to interact. I mean, I really believe that, I mean, in terms of evidence, I think that when Bigfoot is accepted as being a real animal, that we're going to be shocked at how much evidence comes out at once. There's going to be a lot of people that have video and pictures and maybe bones and different types of physical evidence that they're worried about how they would be perceived or looked at if they came out. I think that when somebody or some group figures out a way to get game camera pictures, that when one of us can do it and we can get a picture, then a lot of us will be able to reproduce those circumstances, you know, to be able to do it. But most of the time when you see game cameras, and even some of mine, I mean, you know, they're not very well hidden. I mean, sometimes you're in a place where you just can't get, you know, a good setup or whatever it happens to be. And sometimes I'm using a cheap camera as a setup to distract something from my expensive camera that's hidden somewhere else, you know, just trying different things. I know there's a gentleman in Wisconsin that he has a camera that he's left out in the open with no batteries in it, trying to get something to move it and play with it and get used to it before he moves back in and puts batteries into it. You know, I don't know that it'll work, but, you know, everybody's just, when I say there's a lot of us trying different things, I mean, there's probably 100 of us in North America, and that's not a very big number, that are legitimately in the woods trying to do scientific research on this animal. And we probably have, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people that are walking in the dark, hitting trees, making noises, cooking bacon over a fire, and trying to have an experience. And, and I'm seldom out at night anymore unless I'm with a group or with some of my friends, because, I always say, people go out at night and they want to experience. It's not really about gathering evidence, because anything that you get at night, like, is really not accepted. I mean, there's some good FLIR footage that's out there, some thermal footage, but science isn't interested in it, the scientists. Like, there's a chance that drones are a big deal now with some thermals on them. There's a good chance we could really get something with that. But I mean, it's going to take something really compelling in order for scientists to be interested. Like now on my walking stick that I carry every time, I have a GoPro mounted on it. And, I work on, when I look at something or I always turn the camera the same way that I'm looking. And I think that it would be compelling if someone is able to get, like, 4D footage of a Bigfoot, for 5 or 6 seconds, that's relatively close and crystal clear. It might be a good place to start. Doug Hychek from Monster Quest, he thinks that that would be the tide changing if someone had really compelling video evidence. I don't know whether it would or not. I mean, I kind of suspect that it's going to take a body or some part of one to be able to do it.
Yeah, that's something that we've talked a lot about on here. Is, we've talked that it'll take a body before science, the scientific community actually steps forward and says, okay, yeah, this is a real creature. We've talked a lot about that, as how it would take, the evidence would have to be a body.
Yeah.
Because, even with the footage, even if it was crystal clear 4K, like you said, there would still be so many people coming out and saying, oh, it was a hoax. It was this, it was that. I mean, people would jump on it the first chance that they got. But I commend all your time spent in the woods and all that, because there's not many people. I don't know that I would do that. And there's not many people out there that are willing to do that. I think that I heard it, I either read it or I heard you mention at one time that, people this day and age, they're not out in the woods. So, I mean,
that's right, man.
How are you going to
living their life?
Yeah. How are you going to have experiences or, gain any evidence by sitting on your couch watching Netflix or scrolling through your phone on social media? I mean, it's hard to have any kind of experience of any kind, when that's what you're doing.
Yeah, we never have had a time, in our history that people were in the woods the very most little time that we've ever seen. I mean, people are afraid of the dark. They're afraid of getting lost. They're afraid of snakes. They're afraid, they're just not familiar with the creatures out there. They don't know the trees that are out there. People will hunt deer, but not have any idea of what the trees look like that produce the food that the deer eat. People are just, everybody's busy, they're living their lives. Their kids have games and they're doing this and they're doing that. And Bigfoot's not really a part of it. And sometimes when you start talking to somebody in a long conversation that's not really interested in Bigfoot, and you start detailing some of the evidence out there, they're a little shocked, I think. And by the end of your conversation, they're compelled enough to say, well, maybe somebody should be looking at it. But I mean, no one's really out there. I know I did a radio show here a week or two ago from New Orleans, and they said, well, it seems like if something was out there, somebody would have found it. And I was like, man, I keep asking, like, who's somebody? Because I'm out there all the time. I don't see anybody. There's nobody out there. And, and I think these animals would be, from a very young age, they would be brought up to know where humans go, where humans don't go, how to avoid humans. I mean, I know one time I was sitting on this right-of-way deer hunting, bow hunting, and, I could hear this four-wheeler coming up the right-of-way. Well, these deer just step off the right-of-way about 50 feet and hold still. And the four-wheeler goes right past. They had no idea there was even a deer there. And animals, deer aren't exceptionally bright, but we're talking about something that would probably be humans' closest relative. So, it has to have, some form of intelligence better than most of the animals, like a deer learning when shooting starts to run for a park, or that, that step off the right of way because they won't see if you hold still.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I just don't know that there's that many people that's out there. I think that it'll be, one will get hit on the road, one will get shot by a hunter. There's 3 or 4 cases of those that I've interviewed where people had clear shots with rifles and did not take the shot. But one of the things that really proved this to me, man, was, I don't remember, it was 2 weekends ago or 3 weekends ago was the Ohio Bigfoot conference. So I'm up there. And like I said, there was 5,000 people that came through there. And close to the lodge, it's in Salt Fork, and Salt Fork has a large history of Bigfoot sightings, probably the most notorious place, certainly in all of Ohio, but maybe in all of the Midwest. And buzzards are circling just a couple hundred yards from there. And I watched it all weekend, and I was curious if anybody would walk down there just to see what those buzzards were circling. Because, there's dumpsters behind that lodge. I mean, all the cabins are sold out. All the rooms are sold out. So that there's a lot of junk getting thrown in those dumpsters. And, of course, they're notorious for dumpster diving. And, I never saw anybody go down there. And here, you have 5,000 people interested in Bigfoot at the most notorious place in the Midwest, and buzzards are circling, and no one goes down to look. So what are the odds that, it's going to have to really just be a fluke situation for it to happen? But it's happened historically, if you want to believe all of the accounts. About every 3 years, there is, some type of Bigfoot that, has been killed by a car or shot by a hunter or whatever it happens to be. So, I would like it to be me that, has, I'd like, of course, to have a clear daytime sighting that's close. And then I'd like to be able to get, some clear video on it, or clear game cam shots, and maybe get lucky and find one dead or something where, but I mean, the odds of that are just, unfathomable. I mean, it's ridiculous that, we just don't see predators in the woods dead. There's 20,000 bears in West Virginia. We're not finding dead bears. There's, people don't find, I was going to say bobcats, but actually about 3 or 4 months ago, I found a dead bobcat, and I'd never seen one ever in the woods. And that's the only one that I've really, have heard of someone, unless one got shot by somebody or something. But, coyotes, you don't really see stuff like that. And there's tons of coyotes, hundreds of thousands of them in each state. People don't find those naturally dead. So imagine something that, in Virginia where you live, there may be, say 100 to 125 in the whole state. So maybe, getting outside the major cities, there may be a family group, in like roughly each county, and maybe, so 20 of the counties or 30 of the counties may have, something like that. And, so that's 30 miles by 35 or 40 miles that an animal's in with its family, maybe a couple of them together that have been raised to know where humans don't go, where they're, where food is going to be all the time. And I think that largely because of their size, that, they aren't staying in one place, they require too much food. They would be moving through a pattern or through an area, not migrating, but just through that area. Say, here's Dr. Jones's land that has all these fruit trees that he doesn't let anybody hunt on. And here is, Aunt Jane's house that has this enormous garden everywhere year, and she lives out in the middle of nowhere. And they just know these places as they go. And, you know, if it's out west, it's salmon or whatever it happens to be. I mean, they kill deer often, I'm sure. They would have to do to be able to get through winters in most cases. So, you know, I haven't really found that helpful. I know that it was common for people to say, you know, if you find a good deer population, there's a chance for it to be a Bigfoot. But frankly, in Appalachia, if we would see a field in the evening that didn't have a deer or two in it, all of us would think that was weird. You know, I mean, they're just everywhere in Appalachia.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's really not helpful, you know, to say that. So, I mean, I think I try to stay busy with, you know, I'm looking now, I'm in my office and my bookshelf, you know, I have the book on the tigers. I just finished reading a book on black bears in Idaho. I have a book on mountain gorillas I'm into, a chimp book, orangutan book. And so, you know, just studying those other primates, looking at their behaviors. I was surprised at the book on black bears. I probably took 4 or 5 pages of notes that were just related to things with crossover, you know, because you have a large mammal that largely in many places, they occupy the same space, you know, and so you wonder how they interact together. And, you know, for instance, bears, you know, tend to den. So it's when it's cold, they're on those north facing hillsides where it would stay colder for a long period of time and not disrupt them. Whereas, you know, we expect Bigfoot to be on south facing hillsides when the cold weather is colder. Bears are not the least active. They are from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. And of course, that's the most active time for Bigfoot. So, you know, have these creatures found a way of not interfering with each other and not interfering with each other's possible food that they may be tracking down. You know, it's just interesting to see how those animals interact. And I wonder if that's not going to be how, you know, sometime we work out the keys that we find based on other animals' behavior as it relates to Bigfoot. I don't know. It's just something to ponder.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a really good thing to look at is the relation between, because, you know, other animals will be coming in contact with and having to deal with them much more than humans would. So I think that's a really good thing to look into. Have you had any experiences, any kind of encounters in your time spent in the woods in search of this creature?
So there's these 2 biologists, Hukin and Sullivan, and if I remember right, they were out of Oregon. This is in the 70s, and they had a Bigfoot encounter. And so they really got on the hunt, and, you know, they would keep meticulous notes. And of course, you can imagine they're carrying like a real camera like they used to have to in the 70s. And they said that for every 200 hours that you spent in the woods that were a good woods, that you would anticipate having some type of Bigfoot activity. And that meant finding scat, finding a track, having a sighting, something like that. And when I wrote the first book, I found, because of my own notes, that 200 hours was a good number. So I was, in my past, at times I've done 200 hours in 6 weeks. Now I'd say it's probably 50 hours a month that's in the woods. But what I have found since I have closed it down, where I'm doing smaller areas, or I shouldn't say smaller areas, but not as many areas, and I have more cameras there and a better idea of where to go, then now I think that 100 hours is reasonable for you to expect to hear something. You know, in places like Ohio, you know, it's like fishing in a small pond, whereas places like West Virginia and parts of Kentucky or Tennessee, you know, there's vast areas that they can be in, and it's like more like fishing in the ocean. But I would say that I would find footprints about 3 or 4 times a year, that I would hear something I believe to be a Bigfoot probably about the same, about 3 or 4 times a year. And I don't know if those sound like a lot or not, but to me it doesn't when I'm out usually 3 or 4 times a week. And then usually every other month, I'm off a whole week, and I usually spend that whole week in the woods. So, I had about 2 years ago, I was in a park because there had been a sighting by 2 gentlemen there the same week, 2 years prior to me going there. So, of course, it was on my calendar. So I was there, and it had rained a lot the night before. And I was walking up this steep hillside, and I could see mud in places. So I knew that there was no way that there was anybody else in there but me. And if someone came in walking from the other side, it was around 6 miles to get around. And Shade, my lab, was off leash, and he's really trained and listens well. So he's always about maybe 20 feet in front of me all the time. And I carry my leash around my neck in case I run into, because when I can be off trail, I'm using the trails just to get somewhere remote, then I'm off trail. In the summers, like right now, it's already getting thick in Appalachia, and it's hard to get off trail. And so I had came along this hillside, and I glanced, and off to my right at about 2 o'clock, I saw what I thought was a buff collared hiker with a backpack that had like the bedroll that was up above his neck there, or around the back of his neck. And I just glanced at it for a second. And as soon as I did, I just whistled at Shade, and he ran right to me, and I clipped him on. And literally probably 10 seconds, we were walking again, maybe not even that long. And as soon as we started walking, I just recognized that the trail was fading away from that. And I got suspicious and ran to that spot, and I could see forever there was a big ridge right there. And there was nothing there. There was no hiker there. So it made me feel like that there was a good chance that I'd had a not very good Bigfoot sighting. The week after that, there was 2 deputies at the same park that had a sighting of a juvenile. So it made me feel like that, there was probably something, that was in there. I went back there with Dr. Brown, and him and I had found, in the Stoneman, I talk about perches, and we'd found a perch, which, I think that it works something like this in my mind. Big bucks kind of do this, like they stay back someplace where people don't go, and they're just way back in there. And then when it gets close to dark, they kind of start close into the field and the women and different things. And for Bigfoot, it would be like the deer, the trash can. So I'll look at these parks, and I'll find remote places, dead end roads where fishermen may go or people may picnic, but they're going to clear out at dark, and there's maybe a trash can or something there. And, when you go to those places, I call it a perch because it reminds me of a bird sitting up looking. And you can go to those places and see, well, where, if you were an animal that wanted to come down here after dark, where would you sit at and wait and watch until dark? And, you can pick a spot. And maybe in most places, you may think 2 or 3 areas. And if you go there and looking around, every now and then you'll get lucky, and you'll find where something's been standing, and there's like maybe some rocks stacked up behind a big oak tree, or some broken limbs, like just little ones where something's been piddling around, waiting for it to get dark. And the branches are a big thing. I think that we'd found around 2 dozen, maybe slightly less than that, branches that were broken off. And then closer to the lake, we'd found a twist, which was, pretty compelling. It's maybe the size of your wrist. It's hard for a man to do that. Equipment can do it, but, there's nothing like that in there. So, just on my own, I would think that, yeah, maybe I saw something. But then after finding those things with Dr. Brown, and then the deputies having the sighting, it made me feel pretty confident, that something was in there. So of course I moved a couple cameras in there, and, it's tough to implement technology. The one camera, it was out for a year. I didn't have anything on it. It's always interesting to see how many people go through. In Ohio, there's hardly any place, even the most remote places, maybe somebody or 2 or 3 people go through it a year. And then I pulled one camera, had been out a year and a half. I pulled it on Saturday morning or Friday evening, And when I got back here, it had no pictures on it. So, you know, there's just some type of issue with the camera, but, you know, I lost that year and a half, you know, in that spot. You know, and that's one thing you just can't replace is time. You know, it's just lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a travesty.
I know. I mean, it was, and there's other times, man, there's like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 weekends ago, I had this idea that I was going to set cameras up. There was this, it's a creek, but when they measured it, you know, a creek becomes a river at 100 miles. And when they measured it, this creek was 99 miles, so they call it a creek. But later, you know, they found out with better measurements, it was over 100 miles. But you could throw a rock across it, but, you know, it's really deep, like 20 feet deep or so. And so I just had in my mind that, you know, what if I walked along this creek and would look at the other side, and whenever it was a place that looks like something might come down to get water, or, you know, just looked approachable, that I put a camera on the other side of the creek that maybe the water or the noise or something would once again masquerade my the sound of the camera. So I've been doing that, and I have quite a few of them out shooting across like that. Well, I picked up one, and it's like it had 15,000 pictures on it, but it was like some limb that had just broken off, you know, way up out in the tree bed and had fallen. It was kind of like right in front of my camera. So I literally had, you know, 15,000 pictures of a leaf there, and I couldn't see anything. And it's like that a lot, man, you know, that you'll have, like one time I was in this part of this park that it closes at dark. There's this little gravel road at dead ends at about 4 or 5 miles, and there's this little pond. And then it just is for miles, there's nothing. And I'm like, if there's a Bigfoot, he's going to show up at this pond at some point. And so I picked the area that I thought that would be most likely to come up. I put a camera up, and when I did it, it was in cold weather, so there was no leaves on. And so, you know, you're putting these up many times like that, but, you know, you'll come back and you can't find your camera because it's in the brush or leaves grew up at it. And that's what happened. Was I found a track, and it was only about 12 or 15 feet from my camera. And I got excited, but when I got to my camera, there was like one limb that came out and leafed out, and it was just surrounding my camera, you know, where I couldn't get a shot. And, you know, so it's hard to implement things like that. And then weird things happen. Like one time I was, there was this creek that nothing could cross easily in the winter, and nothing would want to. It's too deep, you know, maybe 15 feet deep. And there was a cliff up above it. So I used 2 cameras to block a hillside, so that if anything came along that hillside, it couldn't get by without passing a camera. And so my cameras took their last picture like the week after deer season. And then they started taking pictures again in April. So it went like 4 months that both cameras weren't running and they weren't taking pictures, and they both turned on the same day. And so I sent both of the cameras to Reconics, and, you know, they told me that the cameras were fine, but, you know, I don't know what happened, but, you know, is it some local atmospheric condition that because there was a cliff up there and there was a river down below, you know, I don't know what happened, but, you know, things like that happen, you know, when you are messing with your thermals or audio equipment and things like that. It's just, it's hard to implement the way that we want to. And none of us are doing it, you know, full time. I mean, everybody has jobs, and, you know, so when you're out there, it's critical that, you know, you talk to the guys that do the long duration recording. I mean, they'll say, well, I try to get 60 nights and I got 24 nights. I mean, it's a struggle for them. I mean, none of them are getting all their full nights, and they'd love to record all day, but, you know, the way the setups are right now, you can't do it. So they're all clicking on at 9 at night till 6 in the morning. And, you know, we don't know what we're missing. And like, I don't know if you saw on social media, the Olympic Project, which is, you know, the group on the Olympic Peninsula out west, great guys that are a huge group of them, you know, they're really involved in this, and they've been doing a recording project, but they had it for like every season but winter. you know, and they've tried it a couple of times, but they just could not get it to work out. So, you know, maybe this year they'll be able to get winter work out, but, you know, it was helpful because, you know, they're saying this is the most active season to hear a audible. This is the most likely place to hear it, whether, you know, it's up high or down low or whatever it happens to be. But, you know, it's data, but the problem right now for us is that we don't have enough data. So, you know, all of us, you know, with my game cameras and my time in the woods and the reports, sometimes we're misled because what appears to be true may not be true at all. We just don't have enough data yet to find it. You know, maybe Bigfoot walks, for instance, there's a primate that's in South America that they're trying to get a picture of. And so, you know, of course, they have scientists that are in the best spot. They're being paid to be there. They have a couple hundred game cameras. They're placing their cameras every 20 meters facing the same direction, and they move them like a checkerboard type thing. And so this primatologist was, Cliff Barrickman and I were talking about this, and she was saying, you know, well, the people that do all your game cameras, which, you know, there's a lot of us that have game cameras, and there's probably, I don't know, maybe a couple of us that have as many as I do across the country. And she's like, well, you know, where do you put them at? And he said, well, you know, like flats, saddles, ridges, waterways, you know, typical things that we would all choose. And she said, well, how do you know that that's how they move? I mean, maybe they only move just on the east side of the hill a quarter way down, and that's the only place they'll go. You know, you just don't know. And that's why I think that if we can get someone that really pays attention to their camera setups and how they do it, and they get a picture, then they're able to go out on social media and say, listen, try this. This is what I'm doing. And I think that we're going to have success that way.
Yeah, I think that's what it'll take. It'll take, you know, a lot of the people in the Bigfoot community actually coming together and sharing with each other, you know, what works and what doesn't work. You know, I'm a huge fan of Wes Germer's show, Sasquatch Chronicles, and, you know, all the people that come on there giving accounts all the time. And, you know, that's something that you hear with almost every, you know, Bigfoot enthusiast or researcher that comes on. You hear about so much of the infighting within the communities. Yeah. And I guess, you know, it's like that in every community that you're in. You know, everybody wants to be, you know, they want to be the man. They want to be the know-it-all. They want, you know, I get all that. But I think just like with anything, I think sorry about that. I think that's what it'll take. It'll take, you know, everybody just putting differences and ego aside and coming together and sharing this data and this collected evidence and, you know, helping each other out in a collective pursuit of this thing.
I don't know, man, whether it's so hard to imagine that happening. I mean, the people out west, I mean, I was just telling somebody tonight by text that, you know, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, witnesses and researchers, you know, just by texting each day. And I had been talking to somebody on the West Coast, and they're very hesitant to like talk or share information. They're very, I don't know, because Bigfoot's been around out there so long in terms of the research, but on the East Coast, you could call almost anybody and they would help you if they could help you. But we certainly have some personalities that are infighting, you know, on the East Coast. But, you know, it's like, I remember a couple of years ago, I don't remember which conference I was at, and I was having lunch with Cliff Barrickman, and he was asking me, you know, well, what are you doing? You know, what do you have going on? And I was telling him at one point I was running pheromone chips. I had mirrors up in the woods and these different things. And he's like, I'm so busy with these conferences that, you know, I couldn't even remember the last time I was in the woods. I'm thinking now he's getting out a lot more, but I was listening to him and I thought, I don't have to do that. I mean, you know what? I'm a chiropractor. That's what I do for a living. You know, I just want to be in the woods. And so I said, I'm not going to speak anymore. And this was right when COVID started. And so I came home and I had like 5 or 6 things across most of the time I speak in the Eastern United States. And so I just called him and told him I wasn't doing it anymore. And then Cliff was supposed to speak at the Big Ohio one, and he wasn't coming because of COVID. And so I covered that one for him. But since then, I've done a lot of podcasts, but I have stuck to my thing about not speaking. I mean, I want to be in the woods and I want to solve it. And I don't want to say anything to people that are speaking, because a lot of people count on that income. You know, I mean, it's important to their livelihood and what they want to do. And so I get that. Or maybe they don't want to be in the woods. Maybe they want to speak. You know, everybody has their different things. I'm just saying that, you know, I want to be in the woods and I want to solve the issue. And hopefully my health will continue to be as good as it is now, and that I'll even get more time in the woods, you know, and be able to come up with different theories on ways that I can get lucky. It's interesting though, you know, like I wonder, you know, I've always believed that there would be even more Bigfoot sightings than there were, that people get in places in the woods and they're like, oh, this place makes me feel weird, or well, I heard a noise, I'm out of here, or whatever, you know. So those are the kind of things we go. But then we'll have other times that we'll see a Bigfoot or we'll hear something, or later find out one was in the area, but, you know, we didn't have any suspicion or we didn't feel anything or whatever. But then other times you do. I mean, you know, I wonder sometimes, you know, what the difference is, you know, that way. I suspect that our forefathers, you know, they really probably had what we would call a sixth sense, but really they were just in the woods all the time. And I think that they probably heard little things like, you know, in the second book, I talk about bird language. And somebody was telling me this week, they were like, you know, I knew a lot about the woods, but then when you start talking about the birds and I really started paying attention, I started noticing that they really did tell on me all the way through the woods, and they do. And I think that animals are there all the time. It's their home, and they pick up on things and recognize things that we don't. And I know that I'm horrible about, you know, I have my map out and I'm going to walk, and this is the area I want to cover. And I'm out there stomping through the woods. And I think that Bigfoot stays still, you know, when it's got a human in the area, and it doesn't move unless it's been seen. And I wonder often how many times I've stomped right past something.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you know, it's kind of like that with almost any animal. You know, that's what I've thought deer hunting quite a bit is, you know, how many have I walked right by, you know, in a laurel thicket or some rhododendron, you know, something really, really thick underbrush. You know, how many have I walked by going to the deer stand, you know, in the mornings to get ready to start hunting? So, you know, if you're taking an animal, if Bigfoot is as intelligent as I believe it is, and I think most of you know, the people that do believe out there, you know, if he's this much more intelligent, or they are this much more intelligent than just your average ordinary animal, you know, obviously if I'm going to walk by, you know, who knows how many deer on my way to the deer stand, how many Bigfoot have I walked by in my day, you know, just out hiking or ginsenging or squirrel hunting. You know, I mean, it's, who knows? I'm with you on that one. Who knows?
Yeah.
So you talked about, I know. Well, first I'll ask your opinion on what Bigfoot is, the actual creature, and what it is. What is your opinion on that?
Hi, baby.
Say hi, Dr. Jones.
Hi, Riley.
She can't hear. Got the headphones. You gonna tell him hi?
Hi, Riley.
Say hi.
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 You believe in Bigfoot? You don't believe in Bigfoot? We pass his silhouette every day. Okay, I'll fix it. Well, you just messed that up. So back to we'll just add our new member here. What is your opinion on what Bigfoot is? You know, because you hear a lot of people talk the supernatural side or you know, to explain away some of these accounts. You know, you hear people say that, you know, it's a non-human primate. You hear people say that, you know, it may be some form of early human, say Neanderthal, something along those lines. What is Dr. Russell Jones' opinion on what Bigfoot is?
So, of course, accepting that no one can say for sure until we have one. But I think that what makes the most sense is the fact that, so, you know, 10 to 20,000 years ago, the Bering Strait, which of course is between Russia and Alaska, was solid ground. It was frozen. And everything that was in the United States got there by that path, with the exception of if something came by boat or whatever, which, you know, now we're learning that some of those people came through before. And so one of the interesting things, I think that a lot of times people will say, what about fossils or whatever? Of course, you know, generally a fossil takes about 10,000 years for something to happen. And, you know, so we may not even have a fossil in the United States of whatever Bigfoot would be. So we would have to look farther over into Asia or maybe even to Africa to see where something would have came from. And so the thing that would be easiest for it to be would be Gigantopithecus, which was in Asia. We have fossils. We have some bones. The bones are around 1,000 teeth, a couple little jaw segments. And ironically, there was millions of these. They're 8 foot to 10 foot tall apes, the largest ape that we know of that existed. And even though there was that many of them, all we have is about 1,000 bones. And so it would have been in that area, say China, Vietnam, and would have came across, and it would spread into the United States, and it would have followed game and territory spreading across the United States. And one of the things that everyone likes about this, it was the ape, it's about the right size. There's more sightings in the Pacific Northwest. That's the most common place. And of course, that would make sense because something came across there. There's other people that like Paranthropus, which essentially looks like a Bigfoot, but it's maybe a little smaller. But it had to come a longer distance to get here because it was coming from Africa, and we don't really have bones that have been found or fossils that have been found in the course of that pathway to suggest it came all the way through. But, you know, it's a possibility, right? And some people like that one. So it could be those two things, or it could be, you know, something that came from those that we're just not aware of yet. That would be, in most cases, what would be most likely. And that would be what would be the easiest thing for it to be.
Yeah, for sure. That would definitely be the most logical explanation. That I could get on board with that. I'm sure Ryan could get on board a lot more with that one too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's changed just since I wrote the first book, and I think it was like 5 things that's possible that it could be or whatever. But, you know, one of the problems I had with Gigantopithecus at that time was that everybody largely believed that it was a bamboo eating vegetarian. But now, you know, the scientists know that that's no longer probably true. It was probably an omnivore, like we believe Bigfoot to be, or a bear, which likely eats, you know, whatever it can or will to survive. You know, but I think it's always interesting, you know, I gave one speech one time on where are the bones, and, you know, just talking about, you know, the process of finding bones in the forest, and how unlikely it was that we would find things in most of the areas where Bigfoot exists. And, you know, like we were talking about earlier, you know, people are busy and they're really not thinking about those things. And it's not something that they're really interested in. You know, they're not studying osteology or, you know, anything like that. That's why I always try to put, you know, there's people that have different skill sets. You know, I've been an outdoorsman my whole life, and you know, and I'm always a hunter. And I think that brings a different, you look at things differently in the woods. And then when you try to put your science background with it, that, you know, you're hoping that it's just something that you're bringing. But there's a lot of people that are just like me, you know, in the Texas, the Wood Ape Conservancy down there. I know that there's a lot of guys are in that group that, you know, are doing great stuff that have similar backgrounds to me. And I think that, you know, if I had to guess, once again, it would be a hunter or it would be a roadkill. And then what would happen would be the scientists, the academics would come out of their ivory towers. They would get paid to go into places that all of us can't go, refuges and conservation places where, you know, there's maybe water supplies that, you know, the public's not allowed in or whatever it happens to be. And they'll be in there for long terms. And, you know, the everyday person, the citizen scientist, so to speak, you know, they'll just kind of fade by the wayside. But, you know, that's why we had to do better. Largely, most of the research being done right now is by citizen scientists. And, you know, you were asking before about the paranormal aspect, and, you know, what we call the woo. And, you know, it didn't really exist largely, say, prior to 15, 20 years ago. I mean, there's a guy named Tom Powell that lives out west that used to be with the BFRO. He's written a couple of books that are great. And Tom's a great guy and he's really bright. And he was kind of interested in the paranormal stuff. And so, you know, as he would tell you that when he was in the BFRO, he used to take all the weird reports that nobody else wanted. And, you know, and when you talk to him, it's pretty compelling what some of the things that he believed. But I mean, I can just say that in my time in the woods, I've never seen anything that I couldn't explain naturally. And I haven't had anything happen, you know, like I said, there's been some electronic things that have happened to me where there wasn't as many pictures as there should have been, or maybe the camera just didn't operate for whatever reason at that particular time, that those kind of people would point to that and say, you know, you were close to one or whatever it happened to be. But, you know, from a scientific standpoint, it just seems weird to me when we have something that we're already making science reach, that we're having to prove something that's hard to prove, that then we're going and adding something else to it that doesn't require it. You know, I think it's a normal animal, so to speak, but it's rare. And then what we have is we have all these people that are going out on the weekends and walking in the woods. And, you know, they're not in the woods very much. They're nervous. They're not getting as much sleep. They're walking around out there. You know, it's exciting. And they hear a noise. And, you know, I would say they're anxious because of all those things. And they would say, well, I got zapped. Bigfoot zapped me. You know, and so I don't think that we can jump to all those things until we exhaust the other things. But, you know, how are you supposed to do that when you have all these people in the woods that, you know, are just not used to being in the woods? So they go out there and they think that they should find something Bigfoot related all the time. And when they don't, well, then, you know, it's somehow magical, or Bigfoot's in a portal, or, you know, Bigfoot's doing whatever. And it's frustrating to see because it seems to be proliferating. And I have a suspicion, you know, I think in the second book I talked about, I thought that it was going to continue to spread. But when it all comes down to it and we know more of the answers, we're going to find out that it wasn't so much involved with that.
Now, do you think when people claim to have that zapped feeling or anything, it could have anything to do with infrasound?
So, I mean, we know that there's such a thing as an infrasound, you know, right? Because elephants, whales, lions, tigers use it. Some of them for communication. Some of them speculated that they're doing it and it causes the animal, the prey animal that they're after to hesitate for a second. It gives them an advantage to do it. But I haven't seen where any of the things that people have claimed to happen aren't more explainable from a normal medical, psychological type condition that's much easier to explain. And we know that it happens rather than making that jump to something that's like that. You know, it just seems weird, like we got the cart in front of the horse to claim something when it's explainable, you know, by some other reason all the time. And, you know, I think there's things that we think now that we didn't used to think. For instance, like, you know, everybody talks now about, I mean, if you go on social media, there's all these pictures of tree structures and all this other stuff that's out there. But I mean, some of the other primates, the greater primates, do manipulate trees and things. And so it seems reasonable to me that Bigfoot may do that type of thing on occasion. And I put some pictures in there of things that I considered suspect, like, or not suspect, but compelling, like glyph type things, patterns in the woods that I see, or sometimes stick being driven into the ground where it was clearly not a natural thing. But, you know, if we look back historically with the Indians, I mean, we have them saying some of the things, you know, like the whistling, the pursed lips, that, you know, some of the things that we know that they do, but we don't hear the Indians talking about stick structures and things like that. And I feel confident that the pioneers and the Indians would have talked about it like they do the other traits of Bigfoot if it was a common thing and happening all the time. And another thing that bothers me about that is, I mean, you take, you know, Simon Kenton or Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett, I'm just choosing Appalachia figures that were woodsmen and hunted for their life, you know, their life. I can't imagine that if there wasn't something out there like that that was making such obvious things, that they wouldn't have noticed it too. And, you know, probably man would have hunted down and killed them by then anyways. So infrasound's a real thing. No one has any proof that it's related to a Bigfoot type thing. But before we say that it is, I think that we need to rule out the normal psychological or medical things that, you know, could cause the same symptoms, which are clearly much more likely than getting zapped by, you know, a Bigfoot, which may or may not even be in the area.
Yeah. Yeah, that could definitely be, well, I mean, that's definitely, I know just fear in general, you know, some of the feelings that you get. I mean, if you just stumble upon well, me personally, you were talking about people that not getting out in the woods and their fear of snakes. I hate snakes. I hate them. I hate them. I don't care if it's a rattler or a garter snake. I don't like them. None of them.
Right.
So if I stumble upon a snake, that snake hits me with some infrasound and knocks me back a couple feet, and I get really sweaty and clammy. And so, I mean, I could see that side of it. I could see how it could be a psychological thing going on. What's your take? I know that you've heard accounts on the lights. You know, you hear all of these accounts with Bigfoot and these lights, you know, or orbs, or some of these some of these things. What's your take on that?
So I know that commonly, Wes on Sasquatch Chronicles, let me say, you know, I'm a big fan and I'm a member and I've listened to every episode that there is. I'm such a Bigfoot geek that I've listened, as far as I know, to every Bigfoot podcast of every episode. And I keep up on all the different shows and listen to all of them because, you know, knowledge is power. And I'm sure that there's some that, you know, are on Wes's show. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But in the course of those 800 episodes or however many he has now, there are a lot of really compelling accounts. And many times you'll hear the same type of repetitious behavior over and over again. And in saying that, Wes would say that, you know, he noticed that many of them have associated lights or other things like that. I can just say that I have never seen that personally anytime that I've been out, whether I was coon hunting or Bigfooting or just hiking at night, whatever it happens to be. Now, I had somebody ask me about it at the Ohio conference, and I told her, and I just sent her a study. There's some studies out now showing that they're noticing these orbs. It's an electronic feature related to areas where there's the tectonic plates, like, where earthquakes would be. Of course, they're all over the country, those plates and whatnot. And that they're finding that there's definitely seeing those in those active areas. And those are commonly in areas where, you would find a Bigfoot type thing. So, I'm not sure if some of it may be related to that. I don't really know, but I know now it's common for me to hear Wes say, well, what about the lights or whatever? And he asked about it. And I just think that I think that you need to listen to all of what the witnesses tell you, and keep track of it all and write it down, because you don't know how it's going to turn. But, I've probably done now close to 1,000 witnesses, and there's patterns that you notice that you expect to hear, like the wrinkles around the eye, the nose is similar to a human's but pressed down. The skin is, can be a couple different colors, like a gray or a darker color, like a black, but it's similar to like a dog's nose is the texture of it. The hair that's on their forearms is longer. Of course, the saying no neck or little neck. And of course, we know all mammals have 7 cervical vertebrae, but it's just that the trapezius muscles are large. It makes it seem like, it's turning because, its muscles are so large or whatever it happens to be. So I think that, there's things that you start to notice, and maybe Wes is like that because he started hearing all these people saying that. I just haven't had that experience. In the same way, I've never taken a dog man report or anything like that. And, you just recently started hearing that. I know there's some people that argue that there's a historical, accounts of that, but not a lot. And once again, not with like the Native Americans or whatnot. And I tend to rely a lot on historical accounts like that, people that lived in the woods and were part of the woods. And, and of course, a lot of it becomes cultural for them. But I think that, if you pay attention to the reports that you take and the ones that you can hear and read from different places, that's why I like listening to the reports, because many, many times I'll see a game cam picture or see a sighting written up in a form of a book that is someone that I interviewed myself, or a picture that I was asked about myself and was of the opinion that it was not a Bigfoot or not Bigfoot related. But many of the books will make it compelling and make it sound like, it was a Bigfoot thing. So I think you have to be careful about where you're getting your reports from, if you're keeping your own diary or a calendar, where you're trying to accumulate your data, that you don't want to add junk stuff to it, that somebody that's just trying to, there's people that believe literally everything that you tell them. And there's people that, they hoax and they fake. It happens. I had one last week, and I had one the week before that as well. The TV shows are popular now, and, people like the attention. So I'm not sure that it's more common than it used to be, but I think it's certainly more common since the TV shows got started.
Yeah. Yeah. People are always trying to get some kind of recognition or their 5 minutes of fame. And what better place to do it than in the Bigfoot field, where you got people that are jumping at every single account or every single eyewitness statement. But speaking of these accounts and these witnesses, if you wouldn't mind, what are, or maybe one or two that if you think about are some of the wildest or craziest accounts that you've taken, what comes to mind first?
The very first one that I ever did when I was in a group was a state policeman here in West Virginia. At that point, like, I was pretty sure that something existed. I was really sure that if it did, it was probably in the Pacific Northwest, but I'd had some things happen to me and I'd found tracks. And so, it just troubled me and just ate at me that, I just felt that need to understand what was going on. I remember asking my family after I found those tracks and stuff and had that experience. I was probably wearing people out a long time ago because I was so consumed with it, just that need to understand it. And so I took this report of a state policeman, and it was in Beckley, West Virginia, which is, not far from you guys. It's in the middle of the West Virginia Turnpike, and, probably, I don't know what, maybe half hour from Virginia, something like that. And he was riding a four-wheeler, and he had his wife on the back, and they enjoyed ginseng hunting. And it wasn't the time of the year in the fall that you hunt ginseng, but they were just looking for places that it might be. And he was riding on a right-of-way, and then he turned and went on this little path, and he was just putting along. And he said, have you ever seen one? And I said, no. And he said, people disappear, and I'm not saying that they do it, but he's like, it's so big, you just can't imagine. He's like, it's as wide as a sheet of plywood. He said, that's what it was, a sheet of plywood. And he's like, I thought it was a fire burned stump, but I glanced back at it, and it was just behind this little tree, but it was enormous. And it wasn't very far from him, like 20, 25 yards. And he's trying to hit reverse, and he's got a weapon. And his wife said, what are you doing? And he's like, look, 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 look. And she just started screaming, oh my God, no, oh my God, no. And, they moved from the country into the city. And last time I talked to him was a couple of years ago. And every time his wife would hear a noise outside, she still thought that Bigfoot was there. And she had to get counseling for it, for post-traumatic stress. And I went back there with one of my friends, Darren Pavarnik, and there was two troopers. Well, in West Virginia, we call them state policemen. And he was chain smoking and crying, and they both had their guns out. And I thought, he saw something. I mean, and that's what compels you. Like, you'll have, like, I took a report yesterday in Ohio, and, it's like, it could be anything. And that's the way most of them are. Or they start out and the person says, I've been in the woods my whole life, and I've heard every noise that it makes. But the reality is that most people aren't very good with the noises in the woods and different birds and different animals and the weird sounds they make. Some of the animals, like the owls and foxes and, just different animals make some noise, man, that are horrifying and weird, especially if you're not used to hearing them commonly. And, I swear some of the times when I hear owls, when they're not making the normal barred owl, going, oh, when they're not doing that stuff and they're doing their running numbers and stuff. You would swear, if you didn't know differently, that it sounded like there was monkeys in the woods. And most of those are not any good, but every year you get like a couple reports that are just hard to discount. It's a ranger that has a clear daytime sighting very close. It's a, whoever it happens to be. I remember one time I took a report from this guy that was the youngest sheriff in the state of Florida, and he worked for NASA, and he retired to West Virginia, and he was driving in a logging truck, just visiting with a friend that was driving it, and they're putting along this road along a creek, and he looked across this creek, and he looked at the guy, and he said, did you see that? And he said, yeah, Bigfoot was down on one knee, cupping his hands, drinking water, and I remember I took a sighting report one time just outside of Charleston, West Virginia, and there was a graveyard, and you know, it backed up to this mountainside, which went on for miles and miles before even the nearest little road. And, you know, commonly you'll hear where they sway, they move back and forth. It's a very common thing. I've often wondered, like, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this, like, I used to have Great Pyrenees dogs, and, you know, they're bred to protect sheep in the mountains. But when they look at you and they're close, they're always like tilting their head back. And, you know, and I'm sure that it's because of their vision, you know, it's making it so it can see me clearly that way. Whereas if it was looking straight, it can probably see a great long distance the other way. And so I wonder when they're moving like that, if they're trying to be able to focus a little clearer with their vision. And, you know, and so this guy had a sighting, and when he called me, he said, you know, I'm going to tell you my name, and I was the police chief, and I was the mayor in Charleston, and I don't want you to tell anybody my name, and I don't want you to put my name down because I'll deny it, but I just want you to know this, and I want you to take it serious because of who I am. And I've had dozens and dozens of people that I've took reports from that could have been on the TV show Finding Bigfoot, you know, when they were in Ohio or they were in West Virginia, or just when they did that special episode, I believe it was last year, which they've been off the air for 2 years, and they came back. Aside from the beginning of the show, they were in Ohio for one person, but then when they came to the rest of Ohio and West Virginia, those were my witnesses they were using. So people could get a good chance of being on that TV show. You know, during one of the episodes, you know, we did 2 or 3 in Ohio and 2 in West Virginia. And there was people that turned it down because, you know, they just, you know, they didn't want to be on. And then, like, I had one guy come to the show and they didn't put it on. But, you know, I found it compelling because, you know, it always makes me wonder, you know, how many people have seen these things. And, you know, there's one place in West Virginia, like we have this resort here called the Greenbrier that a lot of people know, the Greenbrier in West Virginia. And that's where, of course, they had this basement, which, you know, if there was a natural disaster or they were going to fly all the Congress to there, and they'd be in this basement in West Virginia. And, you know, on this one section of road, it's Interstate 64, which of course runs over into Virginia there, into Roanoke. But for about 20 miles before you get into Virginia, there's one section there that's had 5 sightings just in a couple miles on that interstate. And I always used to wonder, you know, what it was. And I talked to somebody up there, and at one place there was a, I don't know if you know, it's like a butcher place where they butcher animals. And so I don't know if it had something to do with that or whatever it happens to be. There's a lot of caves there, but, you know, this gentleman had told me that he was from Kentucky, but he was traveling to the VA over in Virginia, and he had his son with him, and he was in his 50s, and his son, he said, was in his 20s or whatever. And he saw something running across the interstate, and he was watching it. It was because right kind of at dusk, but he saw that these cars on the other side had kind of stopped or slowed down, and he was in the passing lane, and there was a semi on the right-hand lane. And so he was coming up fast on that semi, and he said, you know, he just thought, what's that guy doing? But then as he got close to it, you know, you could see that it had hair all over it. And when it ran across the road, it had to stop to keep from running into the side of the semi. And then when the semi passed, it just went up on the hillside beside the interstate, and the 2 guys were just looking at it very clearly and closely. And so, you know, there was a number of cars that were there that saw that, and you always wonder, like, how many of these people are like this? I took a report here in West Virginia just a few months ago where 2 different cars, and I talked to people in both cars, had seen a juvenile that was only just a couple feet tall run across the road. The people didn't know each other, but they had both seen it. So I find those kind of reports compelling. And, you know, but the odds are that you're never going to be in that place where Bigfoot happened to be. I've been dozens and dozens, maybe 100 times to a place right after a sighting happened to look around, you know, and there's just nothing to be seen. Most of the places you go are not any different than any other place that you would look at in all of Appalachia. You know, it's a remote place that you can see neighbors, but they're probably a distance away. But there's sections of woods that may go for several miles that in between roads that people aren't on very much. And some of the places in Appalachia are so steep that people are riding four-wheelers or running or walking, and they're on the paths, but you know, they're not getting off. It's too thick. It's just not accessible.
Yeah. I was actually, I went to the Breaks Interstate Park, you know, one I thought you were talking about earlier, over the weekend with my family. And I was standing at one of the overlooks up there. And, you know, from an overlook at the Breaks, you can see, you know, for miles and miles, you know, you can see into Kentucky and Virginia, you know, parts of both. You know, and I was just standing there thinking, man, all of this country, you know, it's a completely covered green canopy. There's no way, like, anything that wanted to hide there, no matter how big it was, you know, as long as it was still smaller than the trees, it could hide.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just, you know, while I was up there, while I was looking, that's what I was thinking was, you know, how many squatches could be out there? How many squatches could be hunkered down right now?
I remember one time I was flying to California, and the person I was looking down, and she asked me what I was thinking about. And I was flying over the Sierra Nevadas, which is larger than many rainforests. And I told her that I was thinking of how much space there was. And I was looking how many miles it was between roads and how much, you know, how many Bigfoot could be in there and how possible it is. But it's funny that how many people that I meet, you know, maybe they're patients at the office, or they come and they know that I've written those books and they're curious. They want to talk to me about it. And a lot of people think that they're interested in Bigfoot until they meet somebody that's really interested in Bigfoot. Then they find out that they're really not that interested in a Bigfoot because, you know, some of us, like I said, it's consumed. You know, I sit here in my office and I look, and there's probably 100 Bigfoot books or over there. And, you know, I don't know how many other natural type things just relating to Bigfoot. And there's pictures of Bigfoot stuff, you know, all over my walls. And like I said, I bought a farm based on Bigfoot type thing. It's hard on the people in my life because, you know, I'm very consumed about it. And, you know, like when I was up in Ohio, they have a big book coming out next week. Tim Holleran wrote it, and it's called the Bigfoot Influencers. And it's interviews with people that he feels like across the nation is influencing Bigfoot thought. And so he had this cookout for some of the people that were in the book on Thursday night before the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. And so, you know, you're right on the edge of the lake, this beautiful location, but everybody's talking. But the only thing I can do is I keep looking across the lake at this steep hillside, knowing that, you know, they would like to be in a place like that where it's not accessible, but they get to sit over there and look at us. And I just want to go walk over there and not talk to people.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Jones, we're not trying to keep you all night. Ryan, Lance, either you fellas have questions for Dr. Jones before we start wrapping this thing up?
No, sir. I just want to say thank you for coming on. I've enjoyed all this information and all these stories. This is all.
It was nice to meet you, Ryan.
You know, if we bump into each other at one of the conferences or someplace, make sure you introduce yourself to me in person.
Absolutely. We're actually going to try to make the one in Gatlinburg, hopefully. I think it's in July.
Yeah, I think July 23rd is the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference. Did we lose him?
I'm not sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, my video stopped for some reason. I don't know what that's all about, but I'm not sure.
I don't know either. thought we lost you for a second. I got a little panicky.
Yeah. I'm not sure what it went wonkers on for a second. There we go.
There
we go.
It's back. Yeah, I'm hoping to make it around to some of those places this year. You know, I want to go to the one in Tennessee and maybe Crypticon over Kentucky is not very far from me. It's always hard for me to do it when I just want to be in the woods. But you know, I'd love to get a chance. I always like going there, and you know, and let me say that if people ever in Appalachia want to send me a report or tell me about a report, that you know, I have a website and it's called thebigfootdoc.com, where you know you can look me up on social media, on Twitter. I'm Bigfoot Doc, and you know, I'm happy to talk or to get with anybody. I always tell everybody that I treat them just the way I treat my patients, and they can tell me a story and I won't tell anybody about it unless they want me to. So, you know, that's the bigfootdoc.com.
And make sure if you're listening and you're interested in this episode and you're interested in what Dr. Jones has to speak. Well, before we do that, Lance, you got a question for Dr. Jones?
Yeah, I do. I have just one. This may be a little bit out of left field, Dr. Jones, but this week, of course, on the news has been the Congressional Oversight Committee talking about UFOs, and it's been all over the news and all our C-SPAN and all this kind of stuff. And we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years more and more information about UFOs coming out. Do you think that, in your expert opinion, there is a library or a stash or an amount of information that's being withheld from the Bigfoot community and from just the general populace in general?
So I guess that's a good question, Lance. You know, does the government know about Bigfoot? And I guess that I'm a little bit of a conspiracy person because I believe in Bigfoot, right? So I would say that I believe that there's people in government that know about Bigfoot for sure. You know, for instance, I was thinking earlier, I don't even know why, but, you know, I had heard that, you know, some of the senators, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, I'd heard had Bigfoot sightings. I don't know that that's true, but that's what I'd heard in the past. And so I'm sure there's other people in government that have, you know, like Axon Jackson. If you guys remember him, he's the most renowned forest ranger park ranger ever came out of Yellowstone. And he patrolled the backcountry on horse, you know, and after he retired, he has said that he had a Bigfoot sighting. So I think that there's people in government that have that. I don't believe that black vans roll up if there's a dead Bigfoot. I think that it's too hard. I think people want to tell you, man, as somebody that, you know, I've seen over 200,000 patient visits now in my 31 years. And I think that people have the need to tell or talk about things. And I think it would be hard for, you know, everybody not to hear something eventually. I think it would be hard to keep all that for centuries, well, not centuries, but for decades under wraps. But I do believe that there is people in government that know that Bigfoot's real.
Yeah, that was a really good question, Lance.
It was.
I don't know why I didn't think of that one.
Because I didn't let you talk any, man.
No, look, that's I love when we get guests like you on here that just take over, and because a person like you with the time spent and with, you know, the expertise that you have, you know, they say 10,000 hours makes you an expert. I'm pretty sure you got 10,000 hours in. So yeah. I can say expertise here and feel confident in that. So I love, you know, when we're on here talking Bigfoot, we're just 3 knuckleheads that, you know, have never actually been out in the woods to investigate or do any evidence collecting on Bigfoot. We just love the topic. We love talking about it, and we throw out every theory that's out there talking about it. So when we get the opportunity.
Let me say, I know that everybody says, I know that there's not experts in Bigfoot, right? Because, you know, there really, in fairness, isn't. There's those of us that spend a lot of time in woods and have interviewed hundreds and hundreds of witnesses and have read every book and watched every show and listened to every podcast. So we're probably really informed on the subject, but I'm not sure that, I think it's fair to say that none of us, are experts in the actual animal, but, until we know more. But I'm sure there's a lot of us and a lot of my friends that know entirely too much about it. And like I said, I'm sure some of my friends and family would tell you that, I'm very, very consumed and passionate about it. They would be having a cookout and I would stop by and eat quickly so that I could go to the woods. And that's just the way it is for me. That's how I live my life.
Yeah. Well, I love it, man. I love it. So what I was going to get to, Dr. Jones plugged his socials, plugged his website. Make sure you guys check out his books. They're available on Amazon. Tracking the Stoneman. His first one, the Appalachian Bigfoot. I love that cover. I love it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
They're super interesting. I haven't finished either one of them. I'm just going to be honest, and because I have ADD and I keep bouncing back and forth between the two. But what I've read so far, I thoroughly enjoy. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Again, I don't want to keep you all night. We appreciate you so much, Dr. Jones, for coming on here.
Hey, thanks, guys, for having me.
Having this conversation. Anything else that you would like to plug before we leave out of here?
No, just reach out to me if you have something you want to tell me. And I talk to people every week on the phone or text or email, whatever they happen to be. The BigfootDoc.com has links if they don't want to go on Amazon, to be able to find it wherever they can get the book at. And I want to say all the people that have read it, it was humbling that so many people have read it and it's been so popular. And I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. We appreciate you, sir.
Okay. We'll
Ryan,
see you guys later. Let's talk soon.
Lance.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. We'll definitely talk again soon. Definitely.
Okay. See you guys.
Bye.
See you. Ryan, Lance, love you boys. This has been fun.
Yeah, man. Love you, buddies.
This is wild.
That was great.
Yes.
That was great.
I actually texted Justin in the middle of it. I was like, "This is awesome."
yeah. Man, what a wealth of knowledge.
Just you ask him one question, you could see you could just watch his brain just roll through the backlog of information that he had and start just rattling off stuff that was it's crazy.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, reading his books and listening to an interview here and there, I thought I knew kind of what I was getting, but I still was not prepared for all of that. I mean, that was awesome.
Great information.
Well, I really enjoyed it, folks. I hope you guys out there enjoyed it as much as we did. And make sure you do go out there. Like I said, these books, Tracking the Stoneman, the Appalachian Bigfoot. If you are interested in the topic and you are in the area of Appalachia, these are a must read. They're a must read because just like you heard Dr. Jones talking about some of the things that he does in the woods, that was still just a portion of what's in the book that he actually does. I'm talking different foods left out, trinkets, putting stuff certain places to see if it's been moved. Like the man is so meticulous in what he does to try to gain evidence of the creature. And it's in a scientific way, which for most of y'all out there, you're probably wondering, why are these guys that are talking about portal jumping quantum Bigfoot having an actual scientific researcher on here? But guys, we got to switch it up. We got to get people that are out there doing this, because I can read, as many quantum Bigfoot books or listen to as many episodes as I want, but I'm not out there in the woods. I just don't have the time for it.
Yeah.
But I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Oh, go ahead, Justin. Sorry.
No, go on, Ryan. Go on. You haven't talked this whole time. Go ahead.
No, actually, Lance hasn't talked this whole time.
Listen, I was just enamored with the man's information. Like, I was just like, I'm a pretty good consumer of information. Like, I feel like I do a good job at like taking stuff in, processing it, and like, and it's sticking in my brain. That was a lot. And it was like, and so well, like, it was a ton of stuff, but in really simple, easily understandable language. Like, he didn't give us a bunch of word salad or legalese talk that made us, he didn't try to, it was just like talking on us, you know, just a good old boy that's spent a ton of time in the woods that is highly intelligent.
Yeah. And he was honest. That's what I love about it. He's totally honest. He wasn't trying to, make anything fantastical or over exaggerate something. I mean, you're talking to a guy that has spent countless hours in the woods, and he'll tell you, well, I may have seen one time. I ain't real sure because this is what I thought it was. So, I mean, you have to appreciate that somebody spending that much time. And look, I'm just being honest with you. I should have said this while he was on here, but if you're looking, especially in this area, but East Coast in general, he's one of the leading researchers.
He's the guy.
Yeah, he's the guy.
He's the guy. He's officially became the guy in my book.
Yeah, he's definitely the guy. All right, guys. Well, I love you, boys.
Yep. Love you guys.
We'll do this again next week. Folks, hope you guys enjoyed this one. Until next time, we'll see y'all later.